to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Hello, my darlings. I thought I would try this out and see how it goes. Some sleep sounds and the darkest of fairy tales to lull you off to sleep. If you like this concept, give it a like. Be sure to subscribe and leave me a comment. If you don't like it, leave me a comment and tell me why or what you would prefer. I appreciate all the interest, and every time you do it helps with the algorithm. We can get this channel back to growing some more. Tonight's fairy tale is one of the darkest, and of course comes from the Grimm brothers. The Robber Bridegroom, which is under the category of Bluebeard. There once was a miller who had one beautiful daughter, and as she was grown up, he was anxious that she should be well married and provided for. He said to himself, "I will give her to the first suitable man who comes and asks for her hand." Not long after, a suitor appeared, and as he appeared to be very rich, and the miller could see nothing wrong in him with which to find fault, he betrothed his daughter to him. But the girl did not care for the man, as a girl ought to care for her betrothed husband. She did not feel that she could trust him, and she could not look at him, nor think of him without an inward shudder. One day he said to her, "You have not yet paid me a visit, although we have been betrothed for some time." "I do not know where your house is," she answered. "My house is out there in the dark forest," he said. She tried to excuse herself by saying that she would not be able to find the way thither. Her betrothed only replied, "You must come and see me next Sunday. I have already invited guests for that day. And that you may not mistake the way, I will strew ashes along the path." When Sunday came, and it was time for the girl to start, a feeling of dread came over her which she could not explain, and that she might be able to find her path again. She filled her pockets with peas and lentils to sprinkle on the ground as she went along. On reaching the entrance to the forest, she found the path strewn with ashes, and these she followed, throwing down some peas on either side of her at every step she took. She walked the whole day until she came to the deepest, darkest part of the forest. There she saw a lonely house, looking so grim and mysterious that it did not please her at all. She stepped inside, but not a soul was to be seen, and a great silence reigned throughout. Suddenly a voice cried, turn back, young maiden fair. Linger not in this murderer's lair." The girl looked up and saw that the voice came from a bird hanging in a cage on the wall. Again it cried, turn back, young maiden fair. Linger not in this murderer's lair." The girl passed on, going from room to room of the house, but they were all empty, and she saw no one. At last she came to the cellar, and there sat a very, very old woman who could not keep her head from shaking. "Can you tell me," asked the girl, "if my betrothed husband lives here?" "Oh, you poor child," answered the old woman. "What a place for you to come to. This is a murderer's den. You think yourself promised bride and that your marriage will take place, but it is with death that you will keep your marriage feast. Look, do you see that large cauldron of water which I am obliged to keep on the fire? As soon as they have you in their power, they will kill you without mercy, and cook and eat you, for they are eaters of men. If I did not take pity on you and save you, you would be lost." Thereupon the old woman led her behind a large cask, which quite hid her from view. "Keep as still as a mouse," she said. "Do not move or speak, or it will be all over with you. Tonight, when the robbers are all asleep, we will flee together. I have long been waiting for an opportunity to escape." The words were hardly out of her mouth when the godless crew returned, dragging another young girl along with them. They were all drunk and paid no heed to her cries and lamentations. They gave her wine to drink, 3 glasses full, one of white wine, one of red, and one of yellow, and with that her heart gave way and she died. Then they tore off her dainty clothing, laid her on a table, and cut her beautiful body into pieces, and sprinkled salt upon it. The poor betrothed girl crouched, trembling and shuddering behind the cask, for she saw what a terrible fate had been intended for her by the robbers. One of them now took notice a gold ring still remained on the little finger of the murdered girl, and as he could not draw it off easily, he took a hatchet and cut off the finger. But the finger sprang into the air and fell behind the cask, into the lap of the girl who was hiding there. The robbers took a light and began to look for it, but he could not find it. "Have you looked behind the large cask?" asked one of the others. But the old woman called out, "Come and eat your suppers and leave the thing be till tomorrow. The finger won't run away." "The old woman is right," said the robbers, and they ceased looking for the finger and sat down. The old woman then mixed a sleeping draught with their wine, and before long they were all lying on the floor of the cellar, fast asleep and snoring. As soon as the girl was assured of this, she came from behind the cask. She was obliged to step over the bodies of the sleepers, who were lying close together, and every moment she was filled with renewed dread, lest she should awaken them. But God helped her, so that she passed safely over them, and then she and the old woman went upstairs, opened the door, and hastened as fast as they could from the murderer's den. They found the ashes scattered by the wind, but the peas and lentils had sprouted and grown sufficiently above the ground to guide them in the moonlight along the path. All night long they walked, and it was morning before they reached the mill. Then the girl told her father what had happened. The day came that had been fixed for the marriage. The bridegroom arrived, and also a large company of guests, for the miller had taken care to invite all his friends and relations. As they set the feast, each guest in turn was asked to tell a tale. The bride sat still and did not say a word. "And you, my love," said the bridegroom, turning to her, "is there no tale you know? Tell us something." "I will tell you a dream, then," said the bride. "I went alone through a forest, and came at last to a house. Not a soul could I find within, but a bird was hanging in a cage on the wall, cried, 'Turn back, young maiden fair, linger not in this murderer's lair.' And again, a second time, it said these words, 'My darling, this is only a dream.' I went through the house, from room to room, but they were all empty, and everything was so grim and mysterious. At last I went down to the cellar, and there sat a very, very old woman who could not keep her head still. I asked her if my betrothed lived here, and she answered, 'Ah, you poor child, you are come to a murderer's den. Your betrothed does indeed live here, but he will kill you without mercy, and afterwards cook and eat you. My darling, this is only a dream.' The old woman hid me behind a large cask, and scarcely had she done this when the robbers returned home, dragging a young girl along with them. They gave her 3 kinds of wine, white, red, and yellow, and with that she died. My darling, this is only a dream." And one of the robbers saw that there was a gold ring still left on her finger, and it was difficult to draw off. He took a hatchet and cut off her finger, but the finger sprang into the air and fell behind the great cask into my lap. And here is the finger with the ring." And with these words the bride drew forth the finger and showed it to the assembled guest. The bridegroom, who during the recital had grown deathly pale, up and tried to escape. But the guests seized him and held him fast. They delivered him up to justice, and he and all his murderous band was condemned to death for their wicked deeds. This is most definitely the Texas Chainsaw Massacre of the fairy tales, and is told in many different ways: Bluebeard, Mr. Fox, and so forth. Anyway, on to a couple more stories. The Queen Bee. 2 kings' sons, once upon a time, went into the world to seek their fortune, but they soon fell into wasteful, foolish ways of living, so that they could not return home again. Then their brother, who was a little insignificant dwarf, went out to seek for his brothers. But when he had found them, they only laughed at him to think that he, who was so young and simple, should try to travel through the world when they, who were so much wiser, had been unable to go on. However, they all set out on their journey together, and came at last to an ant-hill. The 2 elder brothers would have pulled it down in order to see how the poor ants, in their fright, would run about and carry off their eggs. But the little dwarf said, "Let the poor things enjoy themselves. I will not suffer you to trouble them." And so they went, and came to a lake where so many ducks were swimming about. The 2 brothers wanted to catch 2 and roast them, but the dwarf said, "Let the poor things enjoy themselves, and you shall not kill them." Next they came to a bee nest in a hollow tree. There was so much honey that it ran down the trunk, and the 2 brothers wanted to light a fire under the tree and kill the bees so as to get their honey. But the dwarf held them back and said, "Let the pretty insects enjoy themselves. I cannot let you burn them." At length the 3 brothers came to a castle, and as they passed by the stable they saw fine horses standing there. But all were of marble, and no man was to be seen. Then they went through all the rooms till they came to a door on which were 3 locks. But in the middle of the door was a wicket, so that they could look into the next room. There they saw a little gray old man sitting at a table, and they called to him once or twice, but did not hear. However, they called a 3rd time, and then he rose and came out to them. He said nothing, but took hold of them, and led them to a beautiful table covered with all sorts of good things. And when they had eaten and drunk, he showed each of them to a bedchamber. The next morning he came to the eldest, and took him to a marble table, where there were 3 tablets, containing an amount of the means by which the castle might be disenchanted. The first tablet said, "In the wood, under the moss, lie the 1,000 pearls belonging to the king's daughter. They must all be found. If one be missing by set of sun, he who seeks them will be turned into marble." The eldest brother sat out and sought the pearls the whole day, but the evening came and he had not found the first 100, so he was turned into stone, as the tablet had foretold. The next day the second brother undertook the task, but he succeeded no better than the first, for he could only find the second 100 of the pearls, and therefore he too was turned to stone. At last came the youngest, and he looked in the moss, but it was so hard to find the pearls, and the job was so tiresome, so he sat down upon a stone and cried. And as he sat there, the king of the ants, whose life he had saved, came to help him with 5,000 ants, and it was not long before they found all the pearls and laid them in a heap. The second tablet said, the keys of the princess's bedchamber must be fished up out of the lake. And as the dwarf came to the brink of it, he saw the 2 ducks whose lives he had saved swimming about, and they dived down and soon brought in the key from the bottom. The 3rd task was the hardest. It was to choose the youngest and the best of the king's 3 daughters. Now they were all beautiful and all exactly alike, but he was told the eldest had eaten a piece of sugar, the next some sweet syrup, and the youngest a spoonful of honey. So he was to guess which it was that had eaten the honey. Then came the Queen of the Bees, who had been saved by the young prince from the fire, and she tried the lips of all 3, but at last she sat upon the lips of the one that had eaten the honey. And so the young prince knew which was the youngest. Thus the spell was broken, and all who had been turned into stone awoke, and took their proper forms. And the dwarf married the youngest, and the best of the princesses, and was king after her father's death. But his 2 brothers married the other 2 sisters. And if European history has taught us anything, their children intermarried, but that's a story for another night. The Elves and the Shoemaker. There was once a shoemaker who worked very hard and was very honest, but he still could not earn enough to live upon. And at last, all he had in the world was gone, save just leather enough to make 1 pair of shoes. Then he cut his leather out, all ready to make up the next day, meaning to rise early in the morning to his work. His conscience was clear, and his heart light amidst all his troubles. So he went peaceably to bed, left all his cares to heaven, and soon fell asleep. In the morning, after he had said his prayers, he set himself down to his work, when, to his great wonder, there stood the shoes, all ready made, upon the table. The good man knew not what to say or think at such odd happenings. He looked at the workmanship. There was not 1 false stitch in the whole job. It was all so neat and true that it was quite a masterpiece. The same day a customer came in, and the shoes suited him so well that he willingly paid a price higher than usual for them. And the poor shoemaker, with the money, bought leather enough to make 2 pairs more. In the evening he cut out the work and went to bed early, that he might get up and begin betimes next day. But he was saved all the trouble, for when he got up in the morning, the work was done, ready to his hand. Soon in came buyers, who paid him handsomely for his goods, so that he bought enough leather for 4 more pair. He got out the work again overnight, and found it done in the morning, as before, and so it went, and on for some time. What he got ready in the evening was always done by daybreak, and the good man soon became thriving and well off again. One evening, about Christmas time, he and his wife were sitting over the fire chatting together, and he said to her, "I should like to sit up and watch tonight. That way we may see who it is that is coming and does my work for me." The wife liked the thought, so they left a light burning and hid themselves in a corner of the room, behind a curtain that was hung up there, and watched what would happen. As soon as it was midnight, there came 2 little naked dwarves, and they sat themselves upon the shoemaker's bench, took up all the work that was cut out, and began to ply with their little fingers, stitching and rapping and tapping away at such a rate that the shoemaker was all wonder and could not take his little eyes off them. And on they went till the job was quite done, and the shoes stood ready for use upon the table. This was long before daybreak, and then they bustled away as quick as lightning. The next day the wife said to the shoemaker, "These little wights have made us rich. We ought to be thankful to them, and do them a good turn if we can. I'm quite sorry to see them run about as they do, and indeed it is not very decent, for they have nothing upon their backs to keep off the cold. I'll tell you what, I will make each of them a shirt and a coat and a waistcoat, and a pair of pantaloons into the bargain, and you do make each of them a little pair of shoes." The thought pleased the good cobbler very much, and one evening, when all the things were ready, they laid them on the table instead of the work that they used to carry out, and then went and hid themselves to watch what the little elves would do. About midnight, in they came, dancing and skipping, hopping around the room, and then went to sit to their work as usual. But when they saw the clothes lying for them, they laughed and chuckled, and seemed mightily delighted. Then they dressed themselves in the twinkling of an eye, and danced and capered and sprang about, as merry as could be, till at last they danced out the door, and away over the green. The good couple saw them no more, but everything went well with them from that time forward, as long as they lived. And Dobby, well, now he's a free elf. So quote this raven, "Sweet dreams, my darlings." Thank you so kindly for stopping by my chateau, my darlings. It does mean so much to me. Please, if you have not subscribed, as many of you have not, please do so. Give me a like so I know what you would like to hear. And comment. I always love to read your comments. And special thanks to my Patreon and membership supporters. Ciao, darlings.